Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Today I'm sharing a lovely sweet treat layout using a few of the new perspectives from Bramble Fox. I am sharing a layout created using the sweet title perspective, some adorable pink arrows, and the stars and circles stencil. I have a fun memory that I want to record today. This was taken to celebrate our daughter getting a new job. When I first saw the photo with all the bright colors, I was a little hesitant to keep it fully saturated, but I wanted that pink donut to be the focus, so I printed out the photo and tried to figure out a color scheme for my layout. Lo and behold, it was right there on this papersnip sheet. This little flag has the pink to match the donut, some yellow that matches her shirt, and cooler blues that will help calm the brighter colors. This just goes to show that you never know where you might find inspiration. So once I had a color palette, I snagged this paper pack and a handful of perspectives. I'm going to use the sweet title, some arrows, and I have brought in a denim blue photo perspective that I'm considering adding to the page. I will also be using the stencil and shaker bits. I love all the little hearts and sprinkles in here. As I create the page today, I'll bring in a few other items which I will add to the supply list and in the description below. I'm going to start by adding some strips of paper across the top of the page. I want these to go in a diagonal fashion, so I've marked off my cardstock at 3 inches on one side and 5 inches on the other. Before I adhere these in place, I am laying out the 1/2 inch strips across the page to see what kind of pattern I want to create. These are dual-sided gingham papers with a white pattern on one side and a monochromatic pattern on the other. I'm alternating the pattern colors and I'm placing them in the order of that little banner I found on the papersnip sheet. Once I had decided on a pattern, I used some liquid adhesive to adhere these in place. I plan on adding stitching to these, so I don't want to use a tape runner or double-sided tape because that could gum up my sewing machine. I chose to create a pattern with pink on either side, then blue and yellow in the middle. The focus of my page is the donut, so I'm using mostly pink, and then I added some yellow in the center to create a focal point that matches my daughter in the photo. Alright, now that these are adhered in place, I can trim the excess off the top of the page and use a ruler and a craft knife to cut the diagonal pattern. Now, I'm sure there's a way to do this without having an excess of scrap paper, but this was a simpler way for me to get the pattern that I wanted across the top of my layout. I'm going to set this design aside and work on the stenciled portion of my page. I have placed a piece of mixed media paper onto my desk, and I'm using a ruler to draw the diagonal line where my striped border is going to sit. This is upside down at the moment because it's going to be easier for me to reach the space where I want to add stenciling, and it's going to prevent me from having to reach across the screen and block your view as I add them to the page. I'm using the stars and circle stencil to create circular shapes behind my photo. I have selected spun sugar, speckled egg, tattered rose, and scattered straw distress oxides for my page. These colors match the pattern papers I selected, and they're going to create a lovely little confetti pattern in the background. I'm using a small blending brush to fill in the individual circle shapes. The smaller brush makes it easier to create a mix of color in the background, which gives it the look of confetti or donut sprinkles. Bramble Fox has a great set of micro brushes that would have worked well for this, but mine are on their way in the mail, so I used some brushes that I had. As As I move the stencil to the next area of the page, you can see the lovely pattern that this is starting to create. I chose a design that would match the sprinkles on the donut, but this could be used for a birthday, for Easter, or another celebration that you're recording a memory of. It would also make a lovely card background, which I plan on trying later this month. So here is what the finished design looks like near the top of the page. Isn't that cute? I'm going to adhere the pattern paper strips in place, and now I have a fabulous backdrop for my photo. I did add some stitching to each of those paper strips to give them some texture. This took a little bit of time, but it was worth it. With all those bright colors on the page, I decided that black would be a great contrast for the photo frame and complementing elements. I backed the photo in black cardstock and a polka dot pattern paper, and I'm bringing in some typeset pattern paper and 2 circle shapes that I cut with a die. I like the look of polka dots and gingham paired together, which is why I chose that for the photo frame. And those additional little circle shapes add to the donut theme of the page. My title perspective is going to sit vertically to the left of the photo. This sweet title perspective came in a package with another perspective that said Happy Day, and I recently used that on an Easter layout. I'm going to quickly adhere all my pieces in place. I'm just going to use a little liquid adhesive for the circles and the paper strips, and I'll pop that photo up on some foam sheets to give this page a little bit of dimension. After adhering my title in place, I brought in some more pink with these little arrow perspectives. All of Bramble Fox's acrylic shapes come with a protective cover over the front and back that will need to be removed before you adhere them in place. This covering is designed to protect them from scratching or damage while they're being cut and during transport. I have laid 3 arrows on the page around those circle die cuts. These are creating such a fun movement on the page, and they're drawing your eye to the photo in the center. Next to the photo, I wanted to add a large flower. I cut these pieces out from some word phrase pattern that contained a similar color palette to the pattern stripes at the top. In the center of the flower, I'm going to bring in some black embroidery thread. The die created some embossed lines on the smaller flower, so I'm using those as a guide for the stitching holes that I'm going to create. I'm just going quickly around the center of the flower, creating some long stitches with black embroidery thread. Most embroidery thread comes with 6 strands of thread. I used 4 strands because I did want a thicker line that would stand out on the design. Once those stitches were in place, I used my fingers to rough up the edges of the petals, and I used my fingers to give those petals just a little bit of shape. I'm using a few foam dots to pop up that center flower. I cut out a little polka dot piece in black cardstock to place in the center of these flowers, and then I'm going to lay a little puffy heart sticker over the top. This turned out so cute and it looks great next to the photo. Above that flower, I'm going to layer 2 black leaf shapes. They create a nice contrasting element on the page. I brought in that photo perspective to place on the page, but I decided that I would rather have the journaling in this area instead. I do really like this little perspective, so I'm going to set it aside and save it for an upcoming project. One of my favorite things to do is add lots of texture to my pages. I have already added quite a bit of thread texture, but I know that not all of you enjoy sewing, so I'm going to share another way to bring some textural elements to your pages. I have brought in these little sprinkles and I'm pulling out the white hearts and circle shapes and laying them out onto the stenciled images in the background. I probably could have just dropped these onto the page and glued them wherever they landed, but I'm a bit particular where I place random items on my pages, so it took me a little bit of time to lay these all out. I just used liquid adhesive to adhere these in place. I'm using a jewelry pick to help pick these up and place them back down onto the page. I added the sprinkles everywhere that you see stenciled circles, except for the area where I plan on writing out my story. That journaling is going to be added later, so I wanted to make sure nothing was placed in that spot below the photo. So, do you remember that little papersnip banner that inspired this page? I decided to bring it to the lower part of the page with a little papersnip phrase. I think this is a great finish to the design. I'm going to add a few more finishing touches to this layout, and then I'll show you the completed page. Off camera, I added a little stitching to that banner at the base of the page. I also brought in more stitching and texture with some ribbon at the top of the photo. I felt like this layout needed a little bit more pink, so I grabbed my bag of heart perspectives and placed a few near the flower. I like how this creates a visual triangle with the other pieces I've added. Later, I'll place some journaling near the base of the photo, but for now, I want to share a few close-ups so that you can see all the little details. This page is filled with some lovely spring colors that I was inspired to add because of a little papersnip banner. The colors that were laid out on that banner fit my photo perfectly, so I chose to use that as my inspiration piece when I created this design. The memory I recorded today is of a celebratory donut on the first day of a new job, so I brought in a sweet pink title perspective, some arrows, and a few hearts. And then I added confetti and multicolored stencils to mimic the sprinkles on the donut. I want to thank you for joining me for another scrapbooking project. If you would like to see more of my creations, you can visit my channel or follow Miss Carrie's Creations online. If you have any questions about the project or the supplies listed below, feel free to leave me a comment. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.